to make a fair, considered assessment of the project. I'm not talking about railroading things through. I'm talking about could we tweak the process in a way to make it work better? You start.
Yeah. So there's always room for improvement in any process, right? And we diligently look for those at City Hall, from top to bottom. There's no question about that. But fundamentally, I don't think this process is broken. Fundamentally, it has worked for many applicants, since the term of me being mayor. We put through the quick trip in record time. It uses the same process as the process that the Hendricks group that went through, right? When they first came, they weren't fully compliant with the code, but they made changes to do so. From the time of the first staff meeting till the time they constructed and moved in was like 6 months. That was like a record for the city of Delafield. Another one that I'm very proud of is the Chick-fil-A. That one had some complications, That was a conditional use development, and over time, as the last lot that was left, everybody went a little bit over on their green space, and it all ended up getting dumped on that last lot, which made it a challenge to develop. One of the reasons why it sat there for so many years. So we had to work through the Planning Commission to solve that problem, understand that problem, get past that barrier so that we could move forward. Not to mention having to redo the street and putting in the roundabout, passing a citywide referendum, having the applicant kick in $650,000 for the increased traffic and the rebuilding of the road and roundabout, which is solving a problem that citizens of Delafield have been trying to solve for 10 years, longer than 10 years. We got all that done. And it was using the same process. So I'm not convinced that the process is broken. It could be improved. But the process works for a lot of people. And very briefly, let me just basically tell you the simple parts of the process. Applicant calls planner. Planner gives review of initial feedback of whatever you want to develop. The planner then decides this is a little too complicated. We probably need to get staff involved. The applicant calls a staff meeting. We have the fire chief, we have the planning commission chair, we have the mayor, we have the city engineer, we have the city administrator. We meet with the applicant and we go over what we see as the high level issues. What are the barriers to them being able to move their project through? And sometimes they never come back. And sometimes they say that it's something they can work on, and that's where the process begins. And then they request a planning commission meeting and we put it on the planning commission. So that's the real basic part of the process. But it's unfortunate that Hendricks has taken as long as it has. I'm anxious to have it approved, and hopefully they'll be able to supply the information to get that done at the end of the March meeting.
So I guess my opinion is that $110,000 at this point does make a big difference to our bottom line. That's somebody's job. It could be more than one person's job within the city. And I think that the longer that we take to get this building approved, the more at risk some of the things that we have within our city as far as services are. And so I advocate for trying to get this project in. The biggest issue I think that we had within this process is expectation setting. We need to make sure that from the beginning that it is very clear what needs to be provided to the city in order for a meeting such as what happened on February 26th to be performed. I know that one of the things the mayor did was put out a timeline, and he walked door to door to all of the businesses in our downtown with a commitment that this was what the timeline was going to be and this is how we were going to get this project approved. There was a line item on there that said when the Hendricks documents were due. One would assume that if the Hendricks documents were due on a certain date, if those documents had not been provided in their entirety, that the meeting on the 26th would not go forward. And I think that was an assumption that many of us in the community, including myself, made. That expectation was not reset within our community, and that's where this relationship is becoming to be broken. Is we need to make sure that our citizens, the investors, and the business owners who are supporting our downtown district understand what's happening in the process and why it can or cannot move forward. I think that they're all very valid reasons. If we do not have a full picture of the plan, then great, we can't move forward, but that needs to be communicated. And we also need to make sure that those developers have a full understanding of what is necessary in order for us to move forward.
So, Sandra, let me just ask you a quick follow-up on that. So just in terms of big picture process
Yep.
of how projects are approved, do you believe it should be changed? And if so, can you sort of provide whatever ideas you have on that front?
I mean, I really haven't looked at the process too much at this point to understand what it is that we can change, other than the fact that, you know, we have some of the relationships are clearly not being managed and taken care of. I think one of the other things that Kent said that sounds like it's not a good part of the process is that if somebody comes to our city and says that we want to build a building, and then we put all of the onus in their court for them to come back to us with what that plan looks like and what this is going to look like, we are missing out on opportunities that we shouldn't be. So I think that we need to make sure that we're creating partnerships in the way that we are treating these investors who are coming into our city. And I don't know that the process and the way that we're doing it is broken. I think that what's broken right now is the way that we are respecting and treating the people who are coming into this city.
So that's actually a good segue into my next question, which I'll direct to you first, Sandra, about generally how the city has historically approached economic development. And we have, I think it's fair to say, we've generally been reactive in our approach. As you sort of alluded to, we wait for a developer to come to us with an idea, and then that's sort of where we start. Some cities take a more proactive approach and identify opportunities for development, identify potential businesses that they'd like to recruit to the area. What are your thoughts on whether there's room for that in the city of Delafield, whether that's something we should be thinking about and trying to implement as we go forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you talk to some residents within the community, they think that already exists because we have zoning codes. So they think that because we have zoning codes and all of these properties have the understanding of what is supposed to be built there, that that's already out there. I tend to disagree with that. I think that we need to be very proactive of looking at what it is that we need to bring to our community. We need to look at whether we have the right mix of restaurants, whether we have the right mix of activities, do we have the right ways to engage our citizens in this downtown area. I think it's great when I talk to the Delafield History Museum that they are thinking about doing an art gallery. That's definitely something that we need in this community and that will help us bring people into the downtown area. There's a lot of cities around the country that actually don't have zoning codes. And the reason why they don't have zoning codes is because they want to hear about the creative ideas and the things that different developers are thinking of that they could consider for their community instead of dictating and making the process harder for how people actually get things in. That may not be something that we have an appetite for here in Delafield, but it's an interesting thought that, you know, we really might be turning away businesses and growth because our zones are too strict.
Kent, your thoughts on proactivity versus reactivity?
Yeah, so I would agree with you that at least in recent history, and I say the last 10 years, I don't think there's been much effort made by the council and prior mayors to proactively try to look for development. Prior to that, I think it was a little different. I think we did have some efforts of being a little bit proactive in that regard. My vision on that topic is that we become a little bit more proactive, right? It takes two to tango, right? It's the city has the rules and the processes, and the applicant has to decide if they can make any money doing it, right? So they are generally the best person to decide. To move forward on those two issues, you know, I have implemented and got approved in the operating budget by the council at the last budget setting for 2020, $12,500 to, it's a line item in the budget, right? I doubt very many people read the budget, but it's in there as a line item, $12,500 to redo the downtown development plan, which hasn't been updated since 1993. and this is something that I've worked closely with Rob Gilbert. We got a draft of a proposal. I've shared it with him to confirm that he thought, being a large owner of property in downtown, that there was value in this process. So as we've tweaked it after the budget, it's coming in a little bit more expensive than we originally planned. So it's something I plan on working on this year to figure out how we get it done for the amount that's approved in the budget for $12,500. But that's an opportunity, exactly what you're saying, to be proactive, and it surveys businesses, it surveys the people downtown, it takes basically the data that large companies like Kohl's and Targets and things like this have, and bring it down to the local level of the city of Delafield. So that's a proactive move that I made. The second one I made during 2019